ahead. And Kristin, do you want to introduce our global guest speaker, or
I would
maybe?
love to. I would love
Great. Well,
to.
I'm going to hand it over to Kristin and to introduce our guest speaker. Students, if you have questions, always feel free to ask them. I know we had a lot of questions. Did you guys get some of the questions I already sent you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he got the whole sheet.
dozens of them. Yeah.
Great. And again, you don't have to answer all of them, but if there was anything that jumps out at you, I
Good
wanted you to have an
questions, too.
idea of what they are. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kristin and our guest speaker.
Thanks, Darin. Thanks, everyone. Let me introduce Stuart King. Stuart and I have been working together for a while. I think it's almost been 10 years now, technically. It is no secret we're also engaged. So we are business partners as well as partners. And I'll let him kind of give his background for you, but I will say that Stuart and I really came up together in terms of defining what operational technology and industrial cybersecurity looked like for us at the institutions that we worked at. We did work together at a bakery ingredients company, and we did work at Sony together, and then a large consulting firm, which I'm not going to name. So we've actually had quite a bit of experience together. So some of the blending that you heard when I originally introduced myself will come across with Stuart. So I don't want you to be alarmed that I stole it from him. I did not. He learned a lot about operational technology from making sure that he wasn't hazed during factories during our original runs together back in the day. So it's definitely been a journey. We've traveled the world getting to do this great job that we do in risk management. And I'm very, very honored to introduce him. Stuart, you may address the class.
I should point out we are actually both in the same house as well. Kristin has an office at the top of the house, and I'm relegated to the depths of the lower levels of the house. It sort of keeps us a safe distance apart during office hours.
Well, you're also supposed to fend off attackers, right? Because they're going to come in that way. They're not coming in on the third floor. There's no Spider-Man coming up here. So, I mean, it's really a twofold situation there. So don't get it twisted.
Okay. So firstly, thank you for inviting me to give a contribution to this session. I feel quite honoured. I received a big long list of questions. So what I'll do is I'll sort of start at the top and sort of work my way down and leave enough time at the end, hopefully, to if anyone wants to sort of fill in on any of the questions that I haven't answered as we go through them. So I won't spend too much time on an introduction, because a lot of my usual introduction is actually covered in some of the questions I'm going to be answering. As a day job at the moment, I currently work for a large Indian IT services company called Tata Consulting Services, where I have a role as a industry and CISO advisor. I've been in the consulting world now for about the past 6 or 7 years, and had various sort of roles in industry, sort of leading up to that. So I said I won't spend too much time on introduction. I'm here in Northern Virginia. Been living in the US for the last 15 years this year, originally from London in the UK. So if I start at the top, the very first question actually got me thinking. And in fact, I could take up the whole hour just on one or two of the questions that were asked here, but I will attempt to be concise as possible as I go through. So very first question that I have here is, can you tell me about your journey to becoming a CISO advisor and chief architect? Chief architect, by the way, is what I build myself, I should say, as the developer and creator of a new product startup company that Kristin and I are also running at the moment, which is focused around OT risk management. So my journey to becoming where I am today, I should start off by saying that originally I had absolutely no interest in computers or IT or programming until I was in my late 20s, and I was in the Royal Air Force. I was actually working in air traffic control at the time and really had no interest at all in IT until a colleague of mine invited me to help him make some slides to do a presentation. This was back in the day when making slides wasn't on PowerPoint. It involved we used some software called CorelDRAW, and you had to print it out on acetate, and where it would go onto an overhead projector. You're in a university, you've probably got a load of these old machines probably still being wheeled around, I imagine. But anyway, I was invited to help work on that particular assignment, and then a few short weeks later, I'd actually become the airbase expert in CorelDRAW and using the DOS command line. And then a year later, I was actually giving lessons to people in the education centre on how to get the best out of Windows 95 and WordPerfect, and was already midway through an Open University diploma course in learning about programming languages. Over the years.
Stuart, so I know there's a big difference between the Royal Air Force and the United States Navy with submarines, but in 1988, when I was a young lad on a
The year I
submarine,
joined up.
we were given a computer. Here's the submarine's computer. There was no mouse, there were no icons, and I was voluntold. Hey, Darin, you are going to work on this computer and figure it out and how we're going to use this to write things, because no one else wanted to go anywhere near it. Is that a little bit more like your experience of being invited?
Well, you know, I mean, it's hazy memories. I think I had a little bit more. I think I had a little bit more choice than that. However, once people knew I knew a thing or two about computers, that was the point where I was being voluntold for just about everything to do with IT and computers after that. And I was, the air traffic control towers sort of go-to person anytime anybody sort of had a problem or anything needed fixing.
At
So,
least it
yes, I
wasn't
hear
the
you.
go-to for making tea store. At least you moved that role. So
Well,
you're more
yeah.
the towers controller for tea.
Yeah, well, and that. So over the years since then, I must admit, little about my career has really been planned. I've taken opportunities where I had them, not been afraid to take the occasional career risk. There have been a few misses along the way, I have to say. It's not always gone the way that I had planned. But the advantage that that's given me is that the variety of work in the industries that I've been able to work in over the years has, I've been able to gather experience across a very wide variety of industries and environments. And it's the variety that has really set me up for the role that I have today. Because, I mean, if I move on to the next question, which is what are the key responsibilities that you handle in your current role? One of those key responsibilities is to be able to sit down and talk with leaders from organizations across, it could be any industry, any type of organization, any location, and help them solve their security problems. That's really what it's all about. So I need to be able to communicate good security practices and understand things like, an example right now, I'm on an assignment helping one organization strengthen their vulnerability management processes. I'm helping another organization get the most out of a major investment that they've made in a new security monitoring product, and they're really struggling to know how to deal with all of the information that it gives to them, and I'm helping them try to make some sense of it. So the variety of different roles that I've had over the years has led me into a role where I have quite a very wide variety of work to do as a result of it, which is great. I mean, this is really where it's a place in my career where I quite enjoy being at the moment, and coming from a sort of military background where there's a huge amount of variety, every day, it was never, I never really wanted to just, sit behind the same desk for the next 20 years, coloring in PowerPoint slides, which is, what a lot of sort of senior people just end up doing, ultimately is just creating reports and playing politics. My intention was always to remain sort of practical and hands-on. and going into the sort of world of consulting, I suppose, has really helped me be able to do that rather than sort of heading down the, more sort of corporate senior management route, which, could have been the other option. So
I do like the fact that the word consultant is a very convenient word to use when someone asks you to describe your job, and your first thought is, do you have an hour? Or you just say, oh, I'm a consultant.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's sometimes seen as a bit of a, it doesn't always have positive connotations around it. There is the, there can be, sometimes there can be a sort of a credibility challenge sometimes when talking to potential customers, around it. But, I term myself as an advisor rather than as a consultant.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing.
Busy.
I do the same thing. I consult, but I list myself as an advisor.
Yeah, yeah. So what are some of the biggest challenges I face when designing and implementing ICS and OT security programs? So we are straight into it. And I'll tell you, the biggest challenge is really, most of the problems are quite messy, and there's always a challenge in sort of pulling the threads to know where and what really needs to be, really to focus on. And that's one of the greatest challenges when you sort of kick off and start working on any new program. There's some of the other ones that really come to mind, though, are firstly, I've operated around, many different parts of the world, and particularly out in the Far East. And, one of the challenges is also, understanding how different parts of the world operate. There are particularly very different management styles depending on where you are. For some countries, as the leader, you're going to have to be the arbiter of everything, and for other countries, you're going to get more out of teams that are, that want and are allowed to use their initiative more. So that's always something as well that's always sort of makes for an exciting time, sort of learning how to really sort of fit into teams, wherever they might be located. But pulling it back to sort of the biggest challenge of all around designing security programs, and it actually comes back to a metaphor that I like to use, and it's one where if you think about sort of security and what we're actually trying to prevent, which is, the data breach, the security breach, the system being hacked, and malware, ransomware, and everything. But the best metaphor I like is that it's not about being killed by an alligator. If you think about the alligator as being the big event, it's more like being eaten to death by 1,000 chickens. You've got it's always lots and lots of little things, that all add up together, that create the biggest problems. There's never just one single thing that results in a major incident happening. It's always, without fail, a combination of lots of seemingly minor little things, all these little baby chickens, all running around. And it could be, a vulnerability in a website here, and a malware signature that hasn't been updated there, and a PLC that has still got a default password set on it somewhere. All of these little things, all that add up together, that that allow the major incident to happen. And if we look at the history of some of the sort of recent incidents that you can read about in the press, and thinking about things, Colonial Pipeline and JBS and all of these major incidents, the thing that led to them was not something major. It was always, relatively small issues or people related issues that cause these, you know, an incident to happen and then have a knock-on effect that eventually leads to something, you know, very large and expensive, you know, as the outcome. That's the biggest challenge, knowing what to focus on first.
And now no one can get a visual out of their head of 1,000 chickens descending onto somebody. So just so you know, like, I'm now horrified. I am never going to Kauai again, because there's hordes of like chickens that run free. So yeah, that's terrifying. I think piranhas would have been a better one to say, because I think alligator piranha. Just for my insight, I have emotional damage now. So thank you very much.
So next question, can you share some insights into your approach to governing cybersecurity programs in multinational environments? So I can. So your role as a politician is equally, if not even more important than your role as a cybersecurity expert. When you're governing programs, the top thing you have to do is build credibility and trust within the organization and win allies. You have to identify some quick wins right off the bat. If you go into an organization and you can find 3, 4, 5 things that can be accomplished very quickly without a lot of cost, then you will build a lot of credibility, you know, very quickly. But ultimately, it's leadership in cybersecurity, and this probably goes for a lot of other different, you know, careers as well. But you know, it's all about politics, building relationships, building trust. You have to trust people to do their jobs, to let them get on with them. Also, if you're leading a program, it's essential that you're able to build a clear, very concise set of reports. Your ability to report information about your program up to all of your different stakeholders is absolutely critical. And I've seen CISOs lose their jobs because they couldn't do this. You have to be able to clearly state what you're doing, why you're doing it, what you're going to be doing, why you're going to be doing it, how much it costs, and what you need to be successful. Because you don't ever want to come out of a meeting with your leadership, with the board or the audit committee, without telling them what it is that you need in order to be successful as well. Because there's always going to be something that you need, whether it's more people or more money or more time, in order to accomplish you know, the program that you want to put together. So I can't emphasize that your technical skills are what are going to get you into your cybersecurity careers in the first place, but it's those political skills which are going to get you up the career ladder and you know, make you successful. I wish somebody had told me that 25 years ago, because you know, it would have been a very big help to me. So
let me stick my neck out and ask a question in terms of there's so much emphasis on in many of the countries that the students are looking at about ESG and about sustainable development goals. And based on what you're saying, the first thing that comes to my mind is, if you're a chief information officer or some variation of that, you know, title / job description, and you're not making clear connections about your cybersecurity resilience of your you know, your entire corporate and beyond, right? Your partners, your network, that kind of thing. If you're not making clear connections of your cybersecurity resilience and measures and investments and priorities and things of that nature to other metrics such as ESG or sustainable development goals, that would seem like a huge dropping the ball, missed opportunity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a question which sort of covers some of that sort of later on. But yes, there has to be a connection between your program and the objectives of the organization. Absolutely. And you know, a great example is in you know, in the work that Kristin and I, you know, have both done in the past, is, you know, around sort of food manufacturing plants, where, you know, there's things always need to be done. There's always systems that need to be updated, and new security projects and things that need to be patched, and, you know, whatever. Everybody needs to do something. But You know, if you can't just walk into a factory and say, right, we need to spend, $25,000 on implementing a new system. We're going to have to take everything offline for 2 days, in order to do it. A lot of factories run 24/7, 364 days a year. But not only that, they run on very tight margins. Everything in a factory is meticulously costed out, down to the dollar. You take anytime a system goes down, they know by the hour exactly how much that's going to cost, and they track the net profit margin, of every factory very, very carefully. So you're going to lose credibility very, very quickly by making sort of rash demands to make system changes that are going to interrupt that production flow or eat into that profit margin. Unless the work that you're doing is in some way going to either increase that margin in some way or reduce the amount of outage time, and you can tangibly demonstrate that beforehand. So absolutely, a security program must map absolutely critically to the organization's objectives, and that goes for any industry that you're working in. I've worked a lot in industries where it's all about sort of protecting data. So a lot of the security programs were based around compliance regulations and encryption controls, and that's where the focus of security programs were. On the sort of more on the industrial side of things, where I've been working, the emphasis of programs has tended to be more around vulnerability management and threat detection, and making sure that operations can continue without an outage. So yeah, totally agree with you there, Dan. So, in my opinion, what are the emerging trends or technologies that will shape the future of cybersecurity? So, cybersecurity tends to follow along with whatever the current trend or bandwagon is. So, really, as soon as you start hearing about some new tech hitting the market, you can almost guarantee that cybersecurity vendors and products will very quickly start to say they either include it or are protecting against it. The really, really important thing to remember is that regardless of how complex or advanced new technologies are, effective cybersecurity is always going to be more about people and soft skills than it is about the technology. Fundamentally, computers don't commit crimes or fall victim to phishing. It's all about people, and that is absolutely as true today as it was when my career first started. We've actually just been at the RSA conference in San Francisco this week, Kristin and I, and it was interesting sort of walking around the expo and seeing, how often companies are now, they've all jumped on the AI bandwagon, and every product is now AI powered or protecting against new AI threats. So, you can see the example in play.
Also,
Yeah.
zero trust.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Zero trust was also a big one. We were playing marketing bingo, as we called it. But zero trust and AI were the two top marketing trend things. And zero trust scares me because you can't have zero trust because you have humans.
Yeah.
You can't. There's no way. And I love it how they say zero trust is guaranteed. Yeah, okay. Have a nice day. It's scary stuff.
Well, I was just at the Food Safety Summit, and it's amazing how when you go to it year after year after year for many years, to see the growth in data collection, data analytics type exhibitors, and when they have some splashy backdrop, behind their booth, and it's like, data collection is so simple, we make it so simple and easy. It's like, okay, wait a minute, it's not exactly maybe as easy as you're talking about, but 2 weeks ago, and I was telling you this, Kristin, 2 weeks ago, I was at the big retail tech show or something like that, in London, and 95% of all of the technology that was being showed, it was all about money, self checkout, virtual payments, money transfer. And what I found amazing was that over there, they're all being treated like banks in terms of cybersecurity regulations. Because again, they're collecting and distributing money and holding money. It's all virtual to some extent, but they are regulated as if they're banks. So you see just this, again, so much technology, and much of the technology that we're talking about is, again, that kind of the easy opportunity, if you will, for the cyber hackers, for the people who want to be unethical in terms of what they're doing, to find a weakness, and it's just going to be growing and growing. This is one of those things where we used to say, like, in the future, or the next big thing, or the space age. It's here. I mean, it's here, along with all the vulnerabilities that come with these technologies and new solutions.
For sure it is. Okay, so next question. What are some of the most concerning trends? Oh, actually, no, I missed one. Here we go. With cyber threats becoming more sophisticated, what strategies do I recommend for organizations to enhance their cyber resilience? So I'm going to take slight issue with that question, because I'll ask one back, which is, are cyber threats really becoming more sophisticated? I think they're certainly becoming, in some cases, more complex, but mostly still relying on the same sort of tried and tested methods of social engineering and attempts to circumvent security controls. Now, don't get me wrong, we have seen some very sophisticated cyber attacks in the past, particularly around control system security, but the name has just completely gone out of my mind. Iranian.
The nuclear one?
Yeah.
That?
It's like, thank you.
Welcome. I'm glad I'm here to support.
which was a very, very sophisticated attack, but that is really the right now, that is the exception. But cyber threats are certainly becoming more complex, in how they're being deployed and delivered, and with backdoors being implemented in systems even before they're delivered to customers. But so there is an increase, so there is some increase there, but I think ultimately the majority of the threats that we see, are still very much in common with what's gone on in the past. Now, I think as things like sort of quantum computing becomes prevalent, and another new buzzword technology, where as AI becomes more prevalent and so on, then I think doubtless we will start to see more sophistication. But I think ultimately when we talk about the strategies that organizations need to take in order to enhance their resilience, again, I think it falls back on the basic fundamentals of focusing on defense in depth and where the most important assets are, knowing your environment, training your people, and implementing strong incident response and vulnerability management and threat detection programs and good sort of firewall defenses. All of those, the same types of controls that have been implemented over the years. I think where a lot of security programs go wrong is that they they buy in technology before they're at a state of maturity to really be able to utilize it, or they don't have necessarily have the the in-house skills and experience to be able to deploy and utilize a technology in a particularly purposeful and useful way. So the strategy that organizations should be following is one of improving and increasing their overall maturity of their security programs, before they start sort of implementing technologies on top of the sort of standard fundamentals that they need to be getting right first, because otherwise you implement sort of new tools, and firstly you could be overwhelmed with a huge amount of new information, but also implementing a new tool without really being at a mature enough state to use it, you could just be opening up your network to more vulnerabilities than what you had previously, as well. So
I
that
have
is
a question, Darin, to kind of wrap into what Stuart was saying. If an organization has a strong food safety culture, do you see less food safety issues at that organization?
Wait, if it's,
And
if it,
I'm tying it back to if you have a strong food safety culture, does that mean that there is less food safety issues at that organization? And from what Stuart just said, if you have a strong cybersecurity culture, you're more than likely not going to have as many issues because you are primed.
I'd like to say that there's less issues in
Mhm.
terms of issues, meaning like an outbreak or recall.
Or just a casual problem, like
Right.
a fat finger issue or something like that.
What I tend to find is that without a strong culture, most change doesn't happen until they're either faced with a change in legislation, like a new law,
Yep.
or you've been sued. If you have a strong culture, you are more likely to be reacting to issues and have a bit more resiliency, such that you're dealing with these things sooner, ongoing, if you will, and you have less liabilities, less losses, whether it's people being hurt or literally like economic liabilities, economic losses. And the last thing I would say is that the people with the strongest culture and people are those who are looking more proactive, predictive. They're trying to prevent problems before they happen. So they may be doing, like, we have maybe a mock recall or a mock outbreak to test our systems. There may be companies putting this into the cybersecurity. If you look at the people with the strongest culture in terms of cybersecurity, who are doing like mock attacks and see if how do our systems, how do our people react in this? Because we don't want to wait to test our systems in the real world when the real thing is happening. We'd rather test our capability, systems, people, etc., protocols, all those things. We'd rather test it on our own without the real world consequences. Same exact thing for food safety. That's what I would say.
Thank you, because that really does back what Stuart just said. Because again, as an example, Stuart and I both work for Sony together. I spent a lot of time over at PlayStation. I wasn't there when they went through the hack. Granted, that hack was pretty rough because it came from a player. So it was like a personal attack. It was sort of really intense. After that happened, they buttoned up their security posture and their culture, and it was super strong. It was probably the strongest, I would say, unless you disagree with me, Stuart, in the
No,
company.
it
It
was
was amazing. It was almost inspiring when you were there with them, like sitting in their security operations center. It like made you feel proud to be a cybersecurity expert rather than coming into a disaster. And they started taking proactive steps to the point where the other divisions started asking them what they were doing. And they started sharing that knowledge. But there was still things they weren't proactive on that, we raise red flags on quite often, which was really interesting that they handled that aspect and they got really strong in their culture there, but they left out this other huge amount of vulnerability. So it was this interesting learning culture thing. And I think that politician thing that Stuart said really flows in that. You have to be able to look at it from both sides of the coin, quite often and regularly. And test, like you said, Darin, you have to test, pen testing.
Right.
and
Well, I'm
testing.
always astounded by the kind of similarities, if you will, that exist between food safety and cybersecurity in that,
And that's what I love.
people, recent headlines, the Chipotle outbreaks, for
Yeah.
instance. You know what people said after Chipotle? Well, I should eat at Chipotle because they probably are the safest place now because they got their act together, right? Which is, of course, is a fallacy. But people say that every single time. After there's been a major failure in food safety, people always say, well, that company's probably the safest now because of what they went through. Imagine if they had invested proactively into becoming that safe without having to have gone through, whether you look at it in terms of the economic loss or the reputation loss, or the consumers that get sick and in many cases die. Imagine if they invested that kind of effort, that mentality, that political influence and leadership into the idea of, there's always that, well, but if we do this, the cost of doing this is this. Okay, but a true leader will ask a different question. What's the cost if we don't do this? What's the cost of doing nothing? Right? 2 days being taken offline and production losses. Okay, I get that in order to do this. But if we don't do this, we could lose many more days of our systems offline in the long run. So the cost of doing nothing, I think, is the difference. Asking that question is the difference between a strong leader in this area and a weak one.
Yeah, great point. And also comes back to the point of being able to play good politics and make a good business case for yourself to get things done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next question I have is, what are some of the most concerning trends or tactics in recent cyber attacks? So personally speaking, I think it's the knock-on effects, the fact that we're talking about little chickens again, but because everything is connected to everything else, that a small attack can have really devastating consequences. So if we take, for example, the JBS ransomware attack, so that's right in your industry ballpark. So you think about the impacts there. There was disruption across all of their facilities, including all of their beef facilities being rendered inoperative. It wasn't just their operations in the US, but Australia as well. Disrupted not only their operations, but the whole wholesale beef market. There were predictions being made about shortfalls in beef production, and they ended up paying an $11 million ransom to their hackers. So, these days, with the interconnectedness of everything, it's much easier for the effects of a cyber attack to quickly blow through an organization's entire network. In the past, 15 years ago, it was not that difficult to contain malware very, very quickly, in a small subnet, fix and rebuild a computer and dealt with. But these days, often it's not even the targeted organization systems that are attacked. It could be a vendor, a contractor. I think the Home Depot attack was an example of a vendor's systems being attacked, which created chaos and mayhem for for Home Depot. It wasn't actually their own systems which were the target of the attack that really affected them. So the answer to the question, bottom line, is the most concerning trend is the fact that it's very, very difficult to identify and quickly contain an attack before it's had consequences for a very large part of the organization or wider still. And that sort of leads into the next question, which is, how can organizations better collaborate and share threat intelligence? They won't. And we've been playing at this for decades. So look, there are plenty of industry organizations and vendors that sell threat intelligence within third-party products that you can buy, but organizations generally only share information about attacks against their own systems once they become public knowledge. In every organization I've ever worked in, company lawyers will lobby very hard against sharing any information about cyber incidents that hasn't been sort of vetted and gone through, some, review first before being passed on. But, purely for liability reasons, organizations will, they might share within a small closed network, but they certainly won't generally share information about incidents that have affected them, unless it's something that has become public knowledge and they need to, put a release about.
So was that a rare scenario or a situation very recently when executive officer, I don't remember if it was the CEO himself, with the major pharmaceutical company or pharmacy was testifying on Capitol Hill about a cyber attack, a major breach of people's information?
Well, he was probably testifying because he'd been told to.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, not because he wanted to. I would
Right.
imagine that the last thing he probably would have wanted to have done would be found himself testifying in, on Capitol Hill and opening up the company's kimono, so to speak. So
Oh, that was Solar Winds, wasn't it, Darin? I think it was Solar Winds. Then they fired their CISO because CISOs are
Yeah.
scapegoats. Everybody
yeah.
blames the CISO
Yeah.
and they're gone. In fact, there's a concern that CISO should start having their own counsel outside of the council for the organization to protect them, because that's how dangerous it can be sometimes. I have a friend who was a CISO at a very large company that won't be named that is going through that right now and turning around and suing the organization for unruly firing because of an incident that happened.
Wow.
It's pretty intense. It's also probably one of the most stressful jobs in an organization, to be truthful, because you have your hand on everything and godlike cosmic powers, but no control. It's really
Yeah.
strange world. Stuart and I both can say that we would never sign up to be a CISO. It's not something we'd land on. It's not a job that's fulfilling or mentally healthy for us. So I give a lot of credit to the people who can stomach it, for sure, especially having to testify in front of Congress. That sounds horrible.
Yeah, it does. It does. I've testified before Congress, and I wasn't even, responsible for anything. It was just, my experience and my knowledge at the time, and that was nerving. I want to do this. We're kind of running out of time. How about this? What if, Stuart? Why don't you take a look at the list of questions, see if there's a question or two that jumps out at you. In the meantime, why don't we give the students, we have a few students here with us live, give them an opportunity. If anyone has a question, now would be a good time
Or
to.
if Stuart hasn't answered your question in your live here, he can, if you let him know which one.
Exactly. So no pressure, but Sarah, you just went off mute, so I'll go with your hand first.
I always have questions. I'm sorry. Sorry, but not sorry, because I know it's
Don't
helpful.
apologize for having questions. Don't do that.
Yeah. Questions are good.
All right.
So as I was going through your LinkedIn, I noticed OT written a lot. And I know IT, but I hadn't before that known really OT. So I had to look it up and stuff. But I did. And so what would you say is the biggest difference between OT and IT? Like in security wise, cybersecurity wise.
So, okay, from a cybersecurity perspective, there's, the controls around it fundamentally the same. I mean, if you understand, OT is about devices and equipment that control some physical action or measure something, or like PLCs, pumps, valves, actuators, robots. These would all be considered.
Well, Colonial was an OT thing, right?
Yes.
Well, the Colonial pipeline is a really interesting one, because that particular attack was not an attack against OT. It was a ransom. It was a malware attack against Colonial Pipeline's IT systems that caused them to have to shut down their OT, their pipeline operations.
Direct attack.
Now, this is and this is a very interesting point when you read about, you know, so-called OT or industrial cybersecurity incidents. If you dig deeper into a lot of them, and this might go some way towards answering your question, Sarah, but if you dig into a lot of them, they will tend to be attacks against IT systems that just so happen to then have a knock-on effect on OT systems. Because if you're, you know, if you've released malware and it's affected, you know, an ERP system like SAP or JD Edwards, which, you know, can be used for controlling aspects of manufacturing operations, and then if that closes down, then you've caused an OT incident because you've created an outage. So the security controls, you know, are fundamentally the same. What I would say though, on the OT side, particularly to answer that specific question, is that there has to be, I think, a lot more thought put into the design of the networks around it, and a lot more sort of network segmentation, you know, to you know, put sort of certain types of devices within their own subnets, and you know, create better boundaries around operational systems. Firstly, to prevent you know, access. You want to certainly restrict a lot more the types of external access, particularly between those OT systems and the internet, than you would with your enterprise systems. You know, you generally don't want, for example, you know, people you know, within your OT environments accessing or having the same sort of unfettered access to the internet that they might will have if they're just sitting behind a desk in a corporate, you know, in a corporate office, and, you know, able to, you know, access their webmail or social media sites. So those sorts of controls do tend to be a lot more locked down within an OT environment than they would within an IT environment. But fundamentally, it's exactly the same technologies and the same controls that are being, you know, that are being utilized. They just might be, you know, configured in a way to either be sort of more restrictive, or to make sure that only services that are absolutely necessary within the environment and people who are necessary within the environment are given access. Because you have other things going on within those environments as well. You know, it's more common. You know, a lot of OT systems are by design have very, very weak security and no real capability to actually sort of implement stronger security, you know, within them. They have weak default passwords or no passwords, you know, on those systems, or systems need to be configured to be always accessible and logged in, while on your enterprise and IT side, you know, systems are designed with screensavers so that they, you know, lock down. Like my Tata consulting laptop, if I don't touch it for 3 minutes, it locks me out. You know, you wouldn't want that with an HMI on a you know, on a in an industrial environment at an oil refinery, that an engineer needs to have sort of quick access to a control panel for. So that's really where the big differences are, and also understanding what you're able to change and patch as well, and that you can't make the types of changes on those systems that you would be able to on your IT systems, and that's the biggest challenge that a lot of IT security people have when they come into moving into OT, is that you know, that sort of you know, learning you know, what the differences are, and what they, in the fact that they can't just go around blindly applying IT security policies within that, you know, within that environment. And a lot of my work over the last few years has actually been in helping organizations you know, define what their OT security policies are. So, you know, while they're using the same technical controls, it's the way that those controls are implemented in OT is generally going to be different from how they're implemented in IT. Do you agree,
Great.
Chris?
I would say to simplify it, because that was a really good long response. Sarah, honestly, the real big difference between IT systems and OT systems, IT systems, if it's breached, is just going to burn data. You're just going to lose data, right? If an OT system is breached, it's going to kill people, like lots of people, or at least the people in the building. So that's probably the easiest way to put it to you. And in the most extreme terms, it's not going to be like a chicken release of 1,000 chickens onto you. It will be a fire, an explosion, anything like that. That's the biggest concern. So OT focuses a little more on safety as well, rather than just like security in general, because we have to be, because it's cyber physical. You push a button, you deal with a robot. The conveyor belts are considered OT, you know, those kind of things. The mixers. I mean, I'm sure, Darin, you've heard the horror stories of people falling in those. I know I have. So we're losing arms and cutting machinery and things like that. That kind of stuff, if that fails, that's affecting life and product, of course. So that halts everything. But ultimately, Stuart is right. IT systems get hacked. That causes the OT hack. That doesn't mean OT systems don't get hacked. That's a different conversation. And that's more sophisticated, I guess, on that level. But yes, IT data, OT death. There you go. 2Ds.
We have one more question. One of the people joining us, one of the students, has typed, I was wondering if Stuart could speak on anything related to cybersecurity in the UK, specifically because he's from there, that might be interesting in particular for the UK team to look into. Maybe things that might be harder for us to come across while researching, but would definitely be pertinent to our projects. What is
Interesting
something that
question.
has UK written all over it, Stuart?
Well, I mean, the first thing that really comes to mind is the approach to regulations, the whole sort of regulatory framework side of things. So, you know, the UK's approach to cybersecurity is significantly influenced by the European Union regulations, especially in, well, as you mentioned earlier on, GDPR, for example, when the UK was a member of the EU, of course, and it continues to follow similar standards now through the UK GDPR. So
they're more heavily, this is just to help you, they're more heavily on ISO rather than NIST, like we are here, right?
well, yes, they are. You know, yes, I mean, NIST isn't so well known in the UK.
No,
either.
it's not, because they really, the Bible is 27,001
Yeah.
for sure on that level, and then the US likes its free version from NIST.
Yeah, but when you consider that in the US, you know, you've got this very decentralized approach with various federal and state laws impacting cybersecurity, and no single comprehensive law, sort of even similar to GDPR at the moment.
And we don't have any privacy laws.
No, you know, the UK's approach, you know, is very much more centralized. There's also, I would say, very much a focus on resilience. The UK government particularly emphasizes resilience against cyber threats, particularly in critical national infrastructure sectors, something which I think in the US, you're only just really sort of catching up on that. But I think there's a lot more collaboration in the UK between the government and industry in general. So, you know, that's certainly another area that comes to mind. And then I suppose the other one I should mention is around personal data protection. UK policies heavily emphasize protecting personal data. There's stringent requirements for data handling, transparency as well. You know, companies in the UK are, you know, are obligated to implement transparency in every way that they handle data. That's why anytime you go to a European or a UK website, you'll get those, you know, pop-ups that ask you about cookies and, you know, use of your data. That's very much a European requirement. User consent, I suppose, being the being the term that I use. Otherwise, in all other aspects of implementing security programs and technical controls, I would say there's no sort of real difference. CISOs in the UK have the same stresses and pressures as CISOs in the US, as do security teams. And I really wouldn't say that one side of the ocean is any more advanced or mature in the way they implement controls as the other side. I would say it's very similar.
I would actually slightly disagree with that.
I
Stuart, I think that you guys are more regulation heavy, compliance heavy, and very black and white on that. There's no, that's it. This is the rule. And the US is a little more scrappy, and some other countries a little more scrappy, which some of you will figure out, that they're creative in how they handle it. Because like you said, we have state and federal here, but some of these other organizations kind of get a little more bubblegum and shoestring on how they do their security, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You're still within compliance. So yeah, it can be complicated. But yeah, the UK is very strict. That's what I'll say.
But one thing I will say, well, one big difference. So the cybersecurity community in the UK is a lot smaller. Obviously, it's a much smaller country. So it's very easy in the UK to become part of a community, and it's and it's very social, and there are a lot of names that become almost sort of known nationally in the industry, and it's really good community to be a part of. There isn't anything similar really in the US. I think there's lots of sort of like regional communities and disjointed sort of for-profit organizations which sort of build up communities that you can pay and subscribe to. But in the UK, there's a lot of sort of cybersecurity community type networking groups and social events that you don't have to pay to join, and they're sponsored by organizations who sort of pile money into them and support them. There's some government supported organizations as well around security, and I would say it's one big difference between UK and US is that on the UK side it's a lot more sociable. There's a lot more discussions done over in the pubs on Tuesday happy hours and things. So that's a major difference as well.
I'm going to add a kind of a personal and / political note on that. I do think it's ironic that of late all the talk about banning TikTok because of national security, and it's like, but where's the talk about cybersecurity in general? That feverish of a conversation around it in the name of national security, but we're going to go after TikTok, kind of a thing. Yeah. And I'm not downplaying cybersecurity with TikTok or something like that, but it's like I wish that energy from the political conversation over TikTok was seen more in the general cybersecurity landscape here in the US.
Nobody's talking about TikTok security landscape because we all think it's stupid that it's happening, because we all know there needs to be a privacy law, and the only person who's talking about it is TikTok, because they've come to the table and said, we'll help you write it. And the US government was like, nah.
Yeah.
So
after World War II, we went in and helped out so many countries in terms of writing their constitution, so not to point out the irony there. Well, look, I know we're about 10 minutes over, and we could probably sit here for another hour. That being said, I really want to thank you, Stuart. And if you're watching this and a question, you really wanted to have that question answered, or a question came up in listening to this, please send it to me. I'll send it out to Kristin and to Stuart, and we'll make sure that we can follow up on it as soon as we can. Kristin, as always, thank you for joining us and supporting us through this journey. And Stuart, thank you for hanging out in your basement and
absolute pleasure. Yeah,
answering some of the tough questions around cybersecurity and keeping it real.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again. If you're with us live, thank you for joining us. If you're here watching this and recording, I'll make sure to put the link to be able to watch this into this week's module. And just to let everyone know, I will be away. I'll be out of town for the next almost 2 weeks, but I've got the internet. I'm on the phone. I'm on, or, like email and internet. I've got my computer with me. I'll be checking in on things. We will not be having a live virtual class meeting for the next 2 weeks. Also, because I really want you to work on your individual work and working with your team more so than giving up some of your available time to work on class things by being in yet another one of these live class meetings and global speaker. We'll pick that up in a few weeks. But until then, everyone stay safe. Watch out for those solar flares, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Recording. There we go. All right. Thanks, everyone.